So, suicide. Yes, the second half is going to be dedicated to a taboo subject, because no matter how much we try and talk about the subject, it is still a very difficult and sensitive one to get our heads around. But talk we must, and more importantly, listen, because it's by doing so that we might be able to prevent something. Right, so I have two people with me today. We have Wendy, who's going to share her story, where she lost her son to suicide. And we have Sean, who is, are you the creator? Are you the man behind Walking Together?
Oh, I wouldn't go that far. I think it was more of a collective, yeah. Do you want me to explain how it started?
Yes, please.
Yes. Okay, so in my main work role, at the time I was a welfare officer, but now it's a wellbeing support officer, play on words. Initially when I got into the role, just a few months into it, unfortunately, my first supportive role was with someone who lost a loved one to suicide. So new territory for me, although even if I was trained in grief and loss and bereavement counselling, but it was still a new challenge. And unfortunately, a few months later, what happened was someone else lost a loved one to suicide as well. So it was two in the space of a few months. So clearly what I like to try and be proactive and find out, you know, okay, if this is happening, how can we best support these people and give them the best support and service? I looked into going to meet up with some of them, SOBS, Survivors of Bereavement by Suicide, which is the bereavement support network in the UK. And I was still in two minds if this is the right pathway. And then, sadly, unfortunately, a very close friend of my wife and myself as well, her son took his life as well. So that was three.
That's very traumatic for you, Sean.
Yeah, it was a very difficult time. But we needed to, initially before the third one happened, I'd spoken to A and I'd spoken to B, because obviously it's a very, very emotive and very emotional time and very specific, the grief and loss. But I did ask them if they wanted to speak together, if they wanted to have a conversation, because, you know, although it was different loved ones, but it was very similar things that we were experiencing. And then what happened was they did meet, and then unfortunately the third one happened. And then we started meeting as a five. That was the three people in my... There's always a much better half, and that's my wife Elizabeth. And if you ever get the privilege to meet her, you'll know what I mean. She's the rock. So, and then that's when I went over to see Jackie Parry from Swindon SOBS, and then the five of us paid for her to come across and then do some in-house training. We didn't decide to go down the SOBS route and call it SOBS because personal choice, but yeah, we did recognise that we're walking along this journey, this pathway with people who are grieving this specific loss, and that's why we said we're walking together in this, and that's how Walking Together come about.
So this is now established in Gibraltar. How long have you been together, walking together?
I think we're technically into our 6th year now.
6 years?
Yeah. Okay. It's been building up for a few years.
So this is more of a support group?
That's correct.
This is about people who have suffered something very similar to each other, who can share the story, share the burden, share the grief.
Absolutely.
And learn and listen from each other. This happened to you, Wendy?
Yeah.
You're part of the group. Have you been part of the group since the beginning?
Yes. Well, I lost my son. Coming up next month will be 3 years, and it was possibly maybe 8 or 9 weeks after I lost him that I discovered the group, and so I have been a member since, and it's been so needed. And to be honest, it saved my life.
You say it's been so needed, and I completely agree, because suicide comes with a lot of stigma, doesn't it? Like I said before, it is a bit of a taboo subject. Nobody wants to talk about it. It carries that kind of thing around it, and people find it very, very hard to admit that something has gone maybe they feel responsible in the family and something has gone wrong. And
and sometimes people don't, from outside, don't even know how to approach.
Yeah, it's really difficult.
It's difficult all around, you know, because even though you actually feel that pain for the person, because, you know, it's like, how do I approach?
How do you express it?
Do I go and do they relive it again?
Yeah.
Am I going to be the cause of them, you know, breaking down? And it is tricky. It's such a delicate situation, no? I think
very sensitive.
Yeah.
Sean, do you think Gibraltar is any different to any other part of the world? Is there is there something here that is driving people to take their life? Is it a place that's any different to any part, or are our statistics such that it's not?
I'm not sure. There's a yes or no answer to that. Yes, yes, it's different because of our geographical size, and we talk about the ripple effect in suicide because I deliver suicide prevention training, and we talk about this. Roughly about 135 people are significantly impacted on the suicide. 15 on top of that are traumatically impacted. So that's big numbers. But I think we can amplify that in our local community quite a bit because, let's face it, we all tend to know each other so well.
Yeah.
I've been here for 34, 35 years now, so I understand that the culture around it. So I think, in effect, with our size of community, I think pretty much everyone's impacted in one way, shape or form. I don't believe there's statistics. What I can gather, that there's generally world statistics, but local statistics, I'm not aware there are any, either for people who've died by suicide. You notice I don't use the word committed or completed even. But
that insinuates a crime, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
That's what they don't want to do.
Yeah. I mean, it was illegal up to the year 1961, which is farcical anyway. But,
yes, completely.
But it's no longer, thankfully, considered a criminal offence because we've moved on from that. But
statistics would be incredibly helpful. I mean, we already know, looking around the world, that men are more likely to die by suicide, and women are more likely to attempt suicide. Something close to your heart, Wendy? Statistics?
Absolutely. I think it's hugely important. And I think it would help the mental health department because they know what they actually do need. And it's a matter for government. How can you hide from knowing what the statistics are? But I feel as well, we have one door in with an A&E department. And I think we need the data of who goes in there, who's feeling suicidal, who's made an attempt on their life. I think that's hugely important. So we know what we can put in place and what is actually needed here. I think it's incredibly important that we have statistics.
So is that something that you're saying that comes from the mental health aspect, the stresses and strains of life, or otherwise?
We are quite bad with statistics because we know that Gibraltar in itself has never been great to our statistics or anything, and I think that yes, statistics would help tremendously. And it's not because you want to know the name of.
No,
you just want to know, as you just said, the gender, the time of year. And I was going to ask: is there a time of year that is more prominent? Is there? Have you noticed? Obviously, you guys that are a bit more in tune with the subject.
There can be, but I think it's just such a diverse subject. A diverse way of. You mentioned a few factors involved with people who are thinking about suicide, and this is where basically we have to be really careful about. Because what does someone who's suicidal look like or be like? So there's so many factors what can contribute to someone going down that what we call a continuum of moving from the thoughts of and then going down that road. There could be biological factors, physiological factors, psychological factors, current life events, past history events, and all of those categories have a multitude of things going on. So that's why when I spoke about it not so long about when we actively listen, and the other thing is to add to that is not to make people feel guilty that things, because people have gone on to take their life, because that does play a part of the grief involved. But it's more about the preventative stuff, where we can actually start really listening to what's going on and pausing as well. And it's a subject I'm still learning about. Even with the training I've done so far, but I know there's still much more to be done and to learn them. And we all play a part in that within the community. I know, yes, of course, we have to have a robust mental health service and systems in place, but we also need the collective, as I said a couple of weeks ago.
That we all sort of have a responsibility.
Yeah.
And I feel that we shouldn't be shy in coming forward, in that if it is somebody there is no harm if you feel that they're in a bad place to say, are you feeling suicidal? And that's something we've all been scared of.
Yes.
Ask, not.
But to actually ask that question, because you're either going to get a response of, no, I'm not, and maybe they're not, or they're not going to tell you if they don't want to tell you, or they might say yes, and you've immediately broken that barrier. Through that barrier. And then you can progress from there to get support. And for that, if that person is feeling that way, to say yes is a tremendous step forward, and hopefully you're saving somebody's life.
You're absolutely right, because that is the big step. You can see somebody might be down and out, or maybe a little low that day, and you might ask them, you feeling okay, you all right? And they might offload a problem or two, but it's not a deciding factor to the depth of that person's what they're thinking. It's really difficult to know, and I think so many people, family members and friends, one of the constant things that you hear is people saying, he seemed okay, or she seemed okay. I didn't realise. I'm in shock. I would never have thought they were fine yesterday.
Yes, yeah.
This is an issue, isn't it?
It is, and that's why when I first got involved in the group, we looked at what the preventative stuff as well. So that's when I went off and trained as a suicide first aid instructor. So and we teach us. So by being part of teaching suicide first aid, I'm part of the National Centre of Suicide Prevention, Education and Training. And this one-day course teaches us to have that conversation and use the information that the person was giving us. And not necessarily the verbal cues either, because there's the visual ones.
That's right.
There's lots of the body language. There's all sorts of things, but it also teaching people to empower them, as Wendy has said, to empower them to ask the question.
Exactly.
But if you use what they've given you to ask that question, and actually by being bold, and I appreciate you have to be bold in asking the question, but by asking the question, actually, they're feeling that you've got a safe pair of hands, that someone has had the courage to ask me the question, and they feel safe generally to be able to talk about it further.
It's funny that you should say that, because I actually had the opportunity to ask that same question a few weeks ago.
Okay.
I bumped into somebody who I hadn't seen in a long time. I asked how they were, and they stated that they weren't too good, and the way I picked up on the body language and what he was saying, and at the end of the day, I asked boldly, have you been having suicidal thoughts? And straight away he answered yes. And it's what you said, Wendy. If you can pluck up the courage once you've read the room to ask the question, you will find that they will talk about suicidal thoughts with no shame. And that's when you have the chance for prevention. I was a Samaritan for a couple of years, and I did my 5-week course on listening and all the rest of it, and I manned the phones. And I dealt with someone who I won't mention the details of, who I spoke to every day for a long time on the phone, and he eventually took his life.
Right.
And I will never, ever forget that. And it impacted me incredibly. Having to share with that person every day their troubles and knowing full well that they had every intention of doing it, and there was very little that I could do other than listen.
Yeah.
But that seemed a comfort to them. Wendy, taking that into consideration, because that was my experience, what was yours as a mother? Tell us a little bit about your story with your son.
Well, it's very, very hard. So it obviously, the grief you feel is guilt, is hugely. I mean, I still have guilt to this day, and I probably will always have guilt, because when it's your child, you always want to be able to protect your child, whatever age they are, and to feel that I didn't ask that question at the time. I know more now than I did then, and I wish I had known more. And why didn't I realise? Why didn't I see him? The what ifs, and I've gone over my whole life from bringing him up from a child, and what if I'd done this differently? What if I'd done that differently? Until you get to that point where you start to realise it's part of the grief, but it takes a long, long time to process. And when at the very beginning, because I hadn't realised at all, and I have my partner who's absolutely amazing, and I have family and I have friends, but I felt so alone with my grief, and I felt the pain, and it's just so overpowering. And I had not realised at the time I wanted to take my own life. And I mean, I knew what I was going to do. I couldn't bear the pain anymore, and I wanted to be with my son. But what I hadn't realised, because I hadn't Googled it or looked it up, and for people to understand that as well, if they know someone who's been affected, is that the risk of suicide for somebody who's been affected
by it
goes up by 50%.
Bereaved by it.
Yes.
Someone in your position.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I didn't tell anyone. I was so scared. I was so scared of how I was. I was so guilty that I could feel this. And the one thing that stopped me, I mean, I was really not in a good place, was the fact that I had a new baby grandson, and he wasn't on my will. And so that, I didn't put him on my will for quite a while until I felt safe. And if you ask me now, 3 years later, and ask me, am I pleased that I'm still here? I am. And I then went to the group, and I didn't share initially with the group that that's how I'd been feeling. But then I felt comfortable and able to share with everyone and let people know that that is where I was at, and that was how I was feeling. And obviously that's hard. You've got a partner who cares for you terribly, and your family. And part of you thinking, how could I even consider doing this? But at that moment in my life, I wanted to be with my son.
You didn't care.
I didn't. I just wanted.
Incredible, isn't it?
So, but if you... So I'm so grateful for the group. And there's people who have joined the group after me, and we can see the stages they're going through. And so it's not only about we meet once a fortnight. No, we actually have contact in between.
Yeah.
We can pick up when somebody's not managing quite so well at that moment in their life. We'll meet up. We constantly are there for each other, aren't we?
Yeah,
I mean,
definitely.
Sean and his wife are absolutely incredible. They really are, because they give their time.
Lovely.
They give their time to our group. But the group is what has saved me. Because we have an understanding of how I went into that group, and everyone was just so wonderful. And the first people I saw was two mothers.
So, yeah.
And they had survived, and they were surviving.
And they were there.
And that was what, for me, just made me think, you can do this, you will manage this, and I'm here. And now I want to create awareness and help other people and support other people and be there for anyone, and if it saves one life.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is
done good.
important.
Which is really important. It's important to me, it's important for the legacy of my son, so... Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah.
You're making me tear up.
I know.
sorry.
No, not at all.
Because
Absolutely
it is
valid, because my son's the same age as your son.
Yeah.
How do you remember him now?
I remember him. He was. I just remember the lovely person he was, the kind heart that he had, and the caring person he was. And many people come and talk to me because there's nothing nicer than somebody coming and talking to you about your child. You want that. Even if you cry, you want to hear stories. And always come and say to me, oh, he was always so lovely, he was always so polite. So I have lots of, we had a very close relationship. So I hold on to those, I held on to the happy memories, because I think that's important.
And I think it's important to mention in the group, although of course there's tears shed, there's emotions, and there's a safe space to be able to do that.
Yeah.
But we do.
We laugh.
Believe it or not, have a laugh. Because we share those chapters in life, because those chapters are in the life of everyone, and they're not going away. And there's those chapters of fun times and laughter and we have that. But it's a safe space to share whatever emotion you need to share. And people feel comfortable.
Yeah.
And that's the main thing. People need to feel comfortable and work through the stages of grief, and they're not linear. They bounce back and forward all the time.
Everybody's different. Every case
Absolutely.
is different.
Yeah.
How you handle it is different.
Yeah.
There's no wrong or right way.
No.
I think grief comes and goes.
Yeah.
Whether you like it or not. And it's when you remember all the good, the bad.
Yeah, that's it, the triggers.
When you're chatting, the triggers. And then you have those happy memories, and then those laughs and that humour.
Yeah.
And then somebody else comes along. So, I
mean, I talk to my son quite often, you know, and I laugh.
Yeah.
Because I do something and I think, oh, I know he's thinking, for goodness sake, Mum, what are you doing?
So, Sean, just to round up, obviously, I mean, we could talk about this for hours, and it's such a sensitive and important subject, and definitely an important message to get across. What would you say for walking together for anybody who has been bereaved recently, for anybody who might have an inkling of there's something not quite right? How do I go about broaching that very important question? I don't have the courage to, but I think there's something not, you know... What would you say to people out there? How can they contact you?
We've got our website up and running. Got our number, contact details are there, we can contact us directly via the mobile. I'm sure you'll I think it's on your website anyway, but we can put it on there. But I think it's important to get us talking, and we all know get us more so listening as well, and be bold, be bold, and ask the question. I think once we break down that stigma of suicide, it unfortunately is in our society. But it's most, we talk about the belief systems in the training and things like that. It is something which is preventable, and people need to feel safe to be able to talk about those emotions, and talk about that they are feeling the way they're feeling. Not be judged, but be accepted. That's where they're at. And what are we going to do with it? And there are people out there. There's lots of people willing to help. But if anything, just contact our group. You know, we're more than willing. Clearly, there's two factors to that. There's people who have lost their loved one to suicide, and absolutely that's what we're there for. But we're there preventative as well. And Wendy's mentioned that. So there's a lot of work going on, looking into the LOST team, which is a local outreach for survivors of suicide, and we're starting to look into that and how, unfortunately, if it did happen, that we can actually be there and support the person in a much quicker time. But there's lots of things we can do, but people generally can reach out to us, and if we're not the right people, we will signpost you to the right people. And of course, you've got the wonderful Jib Sam's doing lots of wonderful work as well.
So there is stuff.
And many other groups doing wonderful things as well. So,
Sean, you're doing a wonderful thing, and you certainly know what you're doing, and let's push forward, upwards and onwards, spread the word, let's normalise this kind of conversation.
Definitely.
Let's be brave, and when we do have a gut instinct, let's ask that question.
For sure.
Are you having suicidal thoughts? very, very crucial. Wendy, you're incredibly brave to share your story. So many would
Okay, well,
not.
thank you for having us.
No, thank you for coming us. And that's all we have time for. But I somehow figure this is not the last I'm going to see of you guys.
No.
Anyway, thank you so much for joining in. It is a sensitive subject, but a very, very important one. Eyes and ears open to those around you, and do ask that question if you feel you have to. It might make a whole lot of difference. Join us next week again.